Britain was in a difficult position by 1783. The 13 colonies were lost. The British stronghold of Gibraltar in the Mediterranean was under siege by the Spanish. The Dutch and the French were fighting Britain for control of the Caribbean. It was in Britain's best interests to make peace. After weeks of negotiation, Britain signed separate agreements with the 13 colonies, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. New borderlines were drawn in North America. Most importantly, Britain was forced to agree that the United States, which is what the 13 colonies now called themselves, was a free, sovereign country. The American revolutionaries had failed to capture Quebec during the war. Differences between the English-speaking Americans and the French-speaking Canadians seemed to ensure that Quebec would not voluntarily join the United States. However, the coastal colony of Nova Scotia was very similar to the colonies in New England. In fact, three-quarters of Nova Scotians were originally New Englanders, yet Nova Scotia did not join the United States. Why? Halifax, the capital of Nova Scotia, was an important British naval base. The city was run by a small group of wealthy merchants who wanted to build Halifax into a large trading port. These merchants had everything to lose in the Revolution and much to gain by staying out of it.
Some Nova Scotians did not support the Revolution. The inhabitants of the town of Machias, now in Maine, invited George Washington to send an invasion force to attack Nova Scotia. Washington refused. A small force of Nova Scotians, led by Jonathan Eddy, fought several minor battles with the British, but they were easily defeated. However, American privateers were busy raiding British ships and villages along Nova Scotia's coast during the war. These attacks caused so much damage to Nova Scotia's economy that the colony's loyalty to Britain.
Not all Americans supported the Revolution. About 1 in 5 people were strongly in favor of British rule. When the Revolution ended and the Treaty of Paris was signed, between 80,000 and 100,000 Loyalists had to leave their homes in the United States. Some went to England or to other British colonies. During 1783 and 1784, about 7,500 Loyalists settled in what was to become Ontario, and about 2,000 settled in Quebec. At the time of the American Revolution, there were about 500,000 African Americans in 13 colonies. Many of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence were slave owners. By offering freedom to the slaves, the British hoped to ruin many plantations, weakening the rebels. Estimated that more than 10,000 slaves crossed the British lines. Some became soldiers, others became cooks, laborers, or nurses. Loyalists who had slaves kept as many as possible to bring them to Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. Slavery didn't end until 1834, when the war ended. About 3,000 black loyalists went to Nova Scotia, where their descendants still live.
The remaining colonies. The British made serious efforts to establish or build up English in its colonies. They wanted populations that would be loyal to the crown. Loyalists, First Nations, African Americans were welcomed into the North. The War of 1812 ensured that British North America would not be a part of the U.S. Colonies had small populations with little unity. French-speaking colonies disliked British rule. People on the East Coast had economic ties with Britain and New England. The Constitutional Act. Loyalists caused problems, especially for the government. Therefore, those who settled in Quebec demanded separation of the governments. The Constitutional Act divided Quebec into two colonies. These two colonies were Upper and Lower Canada. Lower Canada kept French culture, Catholic religion, and civil law. Upper Canada kept English-speaking Protestant, British law, and institution. The Constitutional Act gave both colonies their own government/governor that somewhat ruled over that colony, similar to the system that caused the American Revolution. A governor had two council members. Members of the executive and legislative councils were appointed by the governor, or a British nobleman. The council members helped government make laws for the colony.